anti-government protests. Bolivian social organizations warn about right-wing plans for a new coup. And Mali faces a malaria outbreak. Hello, welcome to TeleSUR. I'm Carla Gonzalez, and this is from the South. A 16-year-old boy was pushed off a bridge by Chilean police on Friday during demonstrations in support of a constitutional reform. A video showing the 16-year-old being thrown off the bridge and into the river below by a police officer quickly spread on social media. Then, as volunteers worked to rescue the boy, the police launched tear gas canisters at them. The boy was eventually pulled out of the river and taken to a hospital where he remains in serious conditions. Nurses and other health workers were also violently attacked by police during Friday's protest. They had joined the mobilization to demand proper benefits, as they have been on the front lines for the pandemic for months. Nonetheless, police met with the nurses with water cannons and tear gas. Social organizations in Bolivia have denounced that right-wing sectors, aided by the de facto government, are continuing in their attempts at smearing the movement towards a socialism party, with the latest strategy being threats made by authorities saying they will not hand over power if the mass party were to win in 2 weeks.
Media outlets in Bolivia are repeating the words of Interior Minister Arturo Murillo, who traveled to the OAS this week to make claims that fraud is being planned for the upcoming elections, as the right wing continues to fall well behind in all opinion polls.
Let the world take note. Bolivia will not return to an authoritarian populism, even if other populist governments dislike this. As a people, we opted for democracy and we will not allow things to change. Our road is democracy.
The de facto president previously dropped out of the race, giving a lack of support by citizens. In the last elections, her political party won a mere 4% of votes.
We lament these announcements that seek to create conflict on the streets by alleging a possible fraud. What matters most now is the decision to be taken by the Supreme Electoral Court, which is in charge of this entire process. They must guarantee and protect the election's transparency.
Given these threats, social organizations have declared themselves under alert.
The people must be shown the truth of democracy. We will not act out, but we will be alert about any situation. That is why we recommend that the Supreme Electoral Court carry out these elections in the most transparent manner.
The people get to decide. You do not win elections with violence. You win them with votes. On October 18th, our vote will define the future of Bolivia.
Following Janine Añez's withdrawal from the race, there are still 7 candidates in the running. While 6 represent right-wing sectors that were part of last year's coup, the one leading the polls since early in the year has been the candidate for the mass party, Luis Arce.
The latest migrant caravan to set off from Honduras to the United States is trying to make its way through Guatemala. But the migrants have run into police and army blockades in the northern parts of the country as the government works to prevent the citizens from reaching the United States. According to authorities, around 2,000 migrants have agreed to return to Honduras, while the remaining 1,000 say they are growing increasingly frustrated by the lack of food. For their part, the Mexican government has warned that it will enforce its immigration laws, as the Mexican president agreed last year to stop any U.S.-bound caravan to avoid becoming the target of a trade war. Over the past few years, migrants from across Central America have been fleeing violence and extreme poverty in their home countries, walking thousands of miles in search of a better future.
Well, we wanted to see if we could make it as our compatriots did 2 years ago. My brother was among them, and he made it to the United States with his whole family. He suffered, but he got there. I had the same dream.
Venezuelan authorities welcomed the first shipment of the Russian COVID-19 vaccine, Sputnik V, ahead of third-phase clinical trials in the country. Venezuelan Vice President Delcy Rodriguez and Russian Chargé d'Affaires Alexei Seredin officially welcomed the shipment, making Venezuela the first country in the Western Hemisphere to participate in the clinical trials of the vaccine. 2,000 Venezuelans will take part in the clinical trials. The Russian vaccine candidate received regulatory approval on August 11th.
2,000 people will be part of the trial in Venezuela. We will start in the coming days. This trial is preceded by a large number of meetings and agreements with fellow countries such as the Russian Federation.
In Ecuador, the presidential ticket of Andrés Arauz and Carlos Rabascal has been officially allowed to register for February's elections. The left-wing candidates officially registered on Friday, just days after the National Electoral Council allowed Rabascal to replace former President Rafael Correa as candidate for the vice presidency. Citizens from across Ecuador mobilized to Quito this week in defense of democracy after the Electoral Council threatened to completely disqualify the candidates from running. Mexico's Supreme Court of Justice has voted in favor of a referendum which seeks to prosecute former presidents for their crimes. Let's take a closer look.
President Andrés Manuel López Obrador celebrated that for the first time a referendum will be held in the country, as citizens will be asked where they agree to prosecute former presidents for corruption.
That is the essence of democracy. The ministers adhere to the spirit of Article 39 of the Constitution. That power emanates from the people, and they have it all times.
The Supreme Court of Justice had to analyze and endorse the request for the referendum and the question proposed by the president, which was modified.
Our review function should be deployed in such a way as to enable citizen participation within constitutional channels.
With 6 votes in favor and 5 against, Mexico's highest court decided on the question that will be posed to citizens on June 6th of next year.
People will undoubtedly vote in favor of prosecution. Who wouldn't want justice to be done?
The National Electoral Institute is about to conclude counting and verifying the signatures in support of the referendum, collected in less than 2 weeks by different groups.
Mexico is fed up and wants justice. The signatures are not from anyone with money. They come from the people who organized. There were no ads on TV or radio.
So far, these are plans to prosecute former presidents Carlos Salinas de Gortari, Ernesto Zedillo, Vicente Fox, Felipe Calderón, and Enrique Peña Nieto. However, survivors of the 1968 student massacre are demanding the inclusion of Luis Echeverría.
We'll take a short break now. Don't go away. Welcome back. A malaria outbreak in northern Mali has killed at least 23 people in the last 7 days. The country's Ministry of Health said almost 60 people have died of malaria in the north since the start of the year, almost double the number of deaths over the same period last year. About 13,000 malaria cases were recorded in September. The increase in cases has been worsened by recent heavy rains.
The health situation today in Kidal is very alarming, given the influx of malaria patients throughout the region. The health structures are really overwhelmed by patients. We are also seeing a large number of deaths due to severe cases of malaria.
These past 3 weeks, we recorded a total of 537 cases of malaria, of which 164 cases of severe malaria were hospitalized.
Tunisian hospitals have been overwhelmed by the COVID-19 pandemic and are struggling to cope with an influx of new patients. The country's authorities have warned citizens to respect measures put in place to halt the spread of the virus. The country had almost contained the pandemic at the end of June when there were only 1,000 cases and 50 deaths. but cases started to increase after governments lifted lockdown restrictions. The number of confirmed cases has now reached 20,000, including nearly 300 deaths.
The capacity of the Tunisian health system has not yet reached its saturation point. We are starting to have small problems in Greater Tunis and in the Sahel on the south side. For the rest, things are under control, we say. But it's true that the situation requires good epidemiological monitoring.
Talks ahead of a reconciliation process between Libya's warring parties have resumed in Morocco. Representatives from the UN-recognized Government of National Accord and Marshal Khalifa Haftar gathered in the Moroccan city of Bousnika. The talks are aimed at cementing an agreement to bring peace to Libya. On Friday, the United Nations called for urgent action to address the dire situation of migrants attempting to cross the central Mediterranean in order to reach Europe.
Sent last week to monitor the situation of migrants transiting through Libya has highlighted a cycle of violence. People who'd faced unimaginable horrors in Libya were left to drift for days at sea, had their boats dangerously intercepted, and were returned to suffer arbitrary detention, torture, and other serious human rights violations in Libya. People described the ongoing violence and insecurity they faced in Libya, including arbitrary detention, torture, trafficking, sexual violence, forced labour, sale, and other serious human rights violations and abuses.
Somalia has published its electoral calendar, setting the presidential election for early next year. The announcement came after President Mohamed Abdullahi Farmajo reached an agreement with federal state leaders on Thursday. The presidential election will take place on February 8, 2021, preceded by parliamentary elections to be held from December 1st to the 27th this year. Health authorities in Egypt confirmed 149 new COVID-19 cases on Friday, pushing the total number to over 100,000. The death toll has risen to almost 6,000 after 10 COVID-19 related deaths were reported in the last 24 hours. Meanwhile, over 97,000 people have recovered from the disease. The authorities have called on the population to act with caution in order to avoid a potential second wave of the pandemic amid the autumn season and the beginning of the new academic year. Ethiopia's largest ethnic group, the Oromo, have gathered in Addis Ababa to celebrate their annual Thanksgiving festival. This year's Iricha festival attendance was lower than usual, as the government restricted attendance to 5,000 people due to the pandemic. The group, led by its traditional leaders, gathered at several pools of water, symbolizing gratitude and renewal. The Oromo tribe is the largest ethnic group in Ethiopia, constituting more than a third of the population.
Because of coronavirus, many people are not attending the celebration. Only a few people are attending this year. It would have been great if there was no pandemic.
We have more stories coming up. Stay with us. Thank you for joining us again. Armenian and Azerbaijani forces have intensified their fighting over the disputed Nagorno-Karabakh region. The leader of the breakaway province said he was heading to the front and that the final battle for the region had begun. Armenia's defense ministry said separatist forces had repelled a massive attack by Azerbaijan in one area of the front line and had launched a counteroffensive. Both sides have been accused of hitting civilian areas, with Azerbaijan saying Saturday that Armenian artillery had shelled 19 of its settlements overnight.
The fighting is especially intense in the north, and in the south, the enemy uses the entire arsenal: unarmed aerial vehicles, aviation, armored and special forces, as well as artillery. The soldiers of the Defense Army show truly unparalleled displays of heroism. They repel enemy attacks and stand firmly in their position. The enemy continues to violate all the written and underwritten laws of war, striking inhabited areas deep in black lines. Today, these civilian areas have come under artillery fire, including rocket fire at civilian targets in the capital, step naked.
14 people have been killed in a suicide attack in eastern Afghanistan. 42 others have been injured in the attack after a truck loaded with a bomb reportedly exploded near a mosque where locals had gathered for prayers. No group has yet claimed responsibility for the bomb blast. The attack comes at a time when the Afghan government and Taliban are engaged in negotiations in Qatar to end the country's decades-long war.
13 civilians and 1 military personnel were murdered, which brings the total number of deaths to 14. Also in this incident, 42 others were wounded, which includes 4 military personnel, and the rest includes children and elderly people.
German leaders and delegations from all over the country have marked the 30th anniversary of reunification. Chancellor Angela Merkel and 230 guests attended a ceremony which was led by President Frank-Walter Steinmeier. Germany was reunited on October 3, 1990, after 4 decades of Cold War division. East Germany joined the Western Federal Republic less than a year after opening the Berlin Wall.
Yes, the Day of German Unity makes us aware that the international order is strongly contested today. Unfortunately, also in Western societies, we Germans are in favor of international cooperation, even if it has become more difficult. We want to fight for a strong and fair international order together with our partners in Europe. This, too, is a lesson and a mission from our history.
An Italian judge has delayed the hearing of far-right leader Matteo Salvini, who faces possible charges for blocking over 100 migrants from disembarking in Italy. The judge delayed the hearing until November 20th so he could hear from senior members of the government, including Prime Minister Giuseppe Conte. Salvini on Saturday appeared before a court that will decide whether he will face trial on charges he abused his powers as Interior Minister.
We are happy that there will be additional instruction because it will allow us to shed light not only on the facts but also on the decisions taken at the time. We will be able to question political figures who are still in their positions of responsibility, including the President of the Council of Ministers.
U.S. President Donald Trump has received an experimental drug against COVID-19 at the Walter Reed National Military Medical Center. President Trump has reportedly shown mild symptoms, including a fever, nasal congestion, and a cough. The president is reportedly not planning to transfer his authority to Vice President Mike Pence, who is the first in line of succession if Trump were to become too ill to carry out his duties.
Last night I was having dinner and I saw Marine One taking the president here. I heard the night prior around 2 in the morning that he came down with COVID and saw that he was here, and I just felt compelled to come wish him well and support him.
Now let's take a look at other stories from around the world.
India has crossed the mark of 100,000 confirmed COVID-19 deaths, putting the country's toll at nearly 10% of the global fatalities and behind only the United States and Brazil. The Health Ministry also raised the confirmed caseload to more than 6.4 million infections. Public health experts say the disorderly lockdown, which led millions of migrant workers to flee from cities to villages, possibly carrying the virus with them, further complicated the fight against the pandemic. Residents of the French South Pacific territory of New Caledonia are gearing up to vote in Sunday's independence referendum. But experts expect voters to reject breaking away from France's control after almost 170 years, despite rising support from the move. The referendum is part of a decolonization plan agreed in 1998, known as the Nouméa Accord, designed to put an end to a murderous conflict between the mostly pro-independence indigenous Kanak population and the descendants of European settlers known as Caldoche.
From a moral point of view, all the blood spilled, all the history, for me this is the final goal of independence. People have died and there have been conflicts, so you can say independence is the answer to the blood that has spilled.
If you look at the life we lead on the territory and all the advantages we have, it will be totally illusory to change course. Most importantly, because there is no answer from those in favor of independence on what the future holds. They say we'll see, but they have 30 years to discuss the project, and at the moment, we have nothing.
In Italy, at least one person has died and some 20 others are listed as missing after severe flooding across the northern parts of the country. In the region of Piedmont, the situation has become critical as bridges collapse, houses have been evacuated, and whole villages have been cut off after the downpour rendered roads impassable.
And with that, we end this news brief. But you can find all of our stories on our website, telesurenglish.net. And be sure to follow us on social media. For TeleSUR English, I'm Carla Gonzalez. Until next time.